The Phoenix Suns don't want Bradley Beal. The Wizards probably don't want DeAndre Ayton. There might be some deals between the Phoenix Suns and the Washington Wizards anyway. On today's episode of Locked On Suns, we'll talk about what those options might be, as well as what this situation can illustrate about how the Suns will approach the offseason. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we're back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 6 seasons, a writer at Suns.com, and the host of the Just Basketball Show, wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much for making Locked On Suns your first listen to start out your Thursday. Hopefully you guys are excited for the offseason just like me to get this show in your feed every day of the offseason and beyond. Hit follow or subscribe wherever you're finding us. We're free and available on all platforms every single day. So become an everydayer. Get locked on to your favorite team, the Phoenix Suns, on a daily basis. Today's show is brought to you by the Game Time app. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. The big news of the NBA on Wednesday was Bradley Beal working with his representatives as well as the new front office in Washington to move forward on what might finally become a Bradley Beal trade. The Phoenix Suns are not going to be in on a Bradley Beal trade, and I'll actually tell you in a second why that's a good thing. And what it really sort of says that they're not in on those types of sweepstakes anymore. We'll get into that, but the Suns aren't going to get him. And I actually think I would go so far as to say that the Washington Wizards are not going to go out and want to get DeAndre Ayton. I know that's been a popular destination. If you're an everydayer listening to this show, you know that I never really listed them off because even if they were going to rebuild, they would have no incentive to go ahead and get somebody on their books who is already making a max contract, who's already on that second contract. If you're a rebuilding team, the goal is flush all those guys off of your books and start fresh with, players who might eventually become max players, but there's no need to be paying them that way already if you're not trying to really win games. And the Wizards never really made sense as an 8 team if they did keep Beal, or let's imagine that they still do keep him this year, because they have Daniel Gafford on their team, who they just gave an extension to, and probably not as good of a player as DeAndre Ayton, nowhere near the ceiling, I would say, but nevertheless, they're paying, mid-level money to a center, which is sort of what every NBA team wants to do. So, again, not really a big reason to do it. Kristaps Porzingis are still on their roster. He plays some center. Just never made much sense. However, I do feel like there is something to be said for some of these other players, right? I don't think Porzingis makes any sense for the Suns. I just think if you're an all-in team, if you're a team like Phoenix that wants to win a championship this year, I do not think you can take the risk of trading for Porzingis and paying him $36 million, or being the team to try to give him his next contract, which obviously the Suns don't even have cap space to do, but even if it was some sort of extension or something, I would not be wanting to take that risk. And so there's actually 3 guys on the Wizards roster that I think matter here. And you've heard a lot of chatter about this online already. This is a team that the Suns have been circling for a while because of the first name on my list, which is Kyle Kuzma. All right, he has a player option for $13 million, and I think there's enough of a sweepstakes for him. There are enough teams interested in Kyle Kuzma that whether it is cap space teams or whether it is even, I guess if it's just the mid-level, he could decide to just opt into that $13 million and then become a free agent next year and just sort of roll the dice. But either way, I just think there's enough there that the Suns probably aren't getting him on the mid-level. There's a chance that he could opt in and then still be traded to Phoenix. That becomes a little bit of a roll of the dice. If you could lose him next year for nothing, I suppose that there's a pathway there. I don't know if the Suns have the assets to be the one to win a trade battle, a bidding war. But obviously, Kuzma would be an amazing fit. I think that he's maybe not an elite defender at the forward spot, but he's good enough. Frank Vogel has a history with him. And we know he likes Phoenix. We know he appreciates Devin Booker quite a bit and seems to be a little bit of a Suns fan, judging from his tweets and all that. So Kuzma's one we've talked about forever. It would be a no-brainer if there was a way to get him. Monte Morris, same thing. I think that he's unlikely to be gettable. But we'll talk about this more. I do think that there is something to be said for, from the Suns' perspective, utilizing Landry Shamet's contract and the fact that next year he's non-guaranteed, and then the last year he has a team option. That's a pretty tasty, flexible type of contract for a receiving team. So if you're able to package Shamet with really what is only $10 million guaranteed on his deal for this season, beyond that, all that extra money is non-guaranteed, with a bunch of second-round picks, I actually would not be surprised if you started to hear about a bunch of trades that are centered on that type of thing. We saw, a bunch of seconds as one package actually be able to get you quite a bit at the NBA trade deadline, whether that was Jay Crowder or there's somebody else that I know I'm forgetting, but 4 or 5 seconds was kind of like a going rate for some types of players that are similar to Monte Morris, veterans who aren't under contract for a long time, but who might be able to help your team. And then the last one is DeLon Wright, and he would fall into the same category. Another guard who's a little more reliable than Cameron Payne, a little more reliable than Landry Shamet. In the case of Morris, more of an offensive player. In the case of Wright, more of a defensive player. But both guys, I think, could crack a playoff rotation. Maybe not a Game 7 of the finals type of playoff rotation, but could give you capable minutes more so than what the Suns have right now. But let's talk about Beal to close this out. I did want to acknowledge, I would even say Denny Avdia and Corey Kispert are two guys on this Wizards roster that I would be giving a long look at. Although if they are rebuilding, I don't really know what the point would be of moving on from those two. They're young, they're cost effective. In the case of Avdia, yes, he's extension eligible, but I'm not really sure that he's going to be in the market for any sort of gargantuan raise. I could see the Wizards just going out and paying him, just like kind of what they did with Gafford, just a touch above the mid-level and just kind of roll his contract over as an asset. I don't know how gettable he is, although if they could get either of those guys, great. But Beal is the one that I think guides us to our bigger topic today, and the reason is the Suns aren't getting Bradley Beal. I mean, they have no need for Bradley Beal. They have no real mechanism to get Bradley Beal. It would be some combination of like Ayton and Paul, or I don't even know, Ayton and Shamet or something like that. They don't have any picks. They don't really have any means of getting a player like that. But they don't need one because they have Kevin Durant. I started the offseason the way that I did, and the everydayers who have been listening throughout the offseason know what I'm talking about, which was that I did a show at the very beginning of all of this saying no third star, not necessary, not worth it, not what they should be doing. And I stand by that without any hesitation. That is not what this team needs. The NBA is a duos league right now. There's not another big three team that you need to be worried about. That could change. Dallas, the Lakers, any number of other teams could crop up, but that's just not what you should be aiming for. The best teams in the league, whether that's Boston or Denver or Miami or the Lakers currently, all are built around 2 stars. The Suns have their 2 stars. What they need desperately is reliable depth, veteran experience, young guys with upside. We'll talk about more of those as we go today, but the fact that they can't get Bradley Beal actually illustrates that they already got their guy with their big swing, and he's better than Bradley Beal. I'll expand on what I mean in the next segment. First, I'll tell you guys about the Game Time app. Game Time is the number one place to go. My wife and I are planning a trip to hopefully Seattle later this year, and Game Time has me covered for a concert series in the zoo. That's right, and we're hoping to see one of our favorite groups out in Seattle at a zoo. Everything's already sold out because I think this is a pretty popular concert series, but luckily Game Time had me covered. Forget planning in advance, months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event, so you can plan a trip with less than 2 months to spare and still get what you want. Get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Everything you want to see, Game Time has. The Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price, so if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will even credit you 110% of that difference. Snag the tickets you want without the stress using Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA when you sign up to get $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, so we talked about how the Suns aren't getting Beal, why that's actually a good thing. Let me tell you what I mean a little bit in more depth here. Because it's not just Beal, right? It's Damian Lillard. It is, I don't know who's going to become available. I would put Trae Young as a possibility. I would put Karl Anthony Towns as a possibility. I would put Jaylen Brown as a possibility. Throw out Pascal Siakam and I would buy it. There's any number of players in the NBA right now who may or may not be superstar caliber who get dealt this summer. Kevin Durant is better than every single one of them. Put Brandon Ingram on that list. Put Zion Williamson on that list. Kevin Durant is better than every single one of them. The Suns got a top 10 player at the February trade deadline. This might be the next area where I just butt heads with you guys all the time, but I'm going to do my best to just illustrate it to you every chance that I get because I believe it deeply. If you have a chance to get a player like that and the best asset you're giving up is a late 2020s first round pick that's unprotected and or Mikal Bridges, you do it. Every single time you do it. The Dallas Mavericks gave up a future first-round pick for Kyrie Irving on an expiring contract. They weren't even sure that they would get him back. And I think that deal was still largely accepted around the NBA. That it was the cost of doing business to try to win around Luka Doncic. And the same thing can be said of Devin Booker. That's just one example. The point is, the Suns already won the NBA offseason. That's the point. The Suns already won the NBA offseason. They are in a situation where they made the first move, and it just happened to be February. It just happened to be that it was in February, but they didn't get the deal done in last offseason. They would have won that summer. They did not. They basically did nothing. Instead, they got Kevin Durant this February, and he will be the best player to change teams in the calendar year of 2023. The only caveat that I can possibly imagine having to give for that one is if the situation with the Clippers implodes or the situation with the 76ers implodes. I kind of doubt it. I kind of doubt either one of those teams are going to trade their best players, but you never know. Things involving Kawhi Leonard, things involving James Harden tend to get a little wonky. I could see Embiid or Kawhi getting dealt. Those are like very big ifs, but maybe you could convince me that Durant was no longer the best guy. But when you factor in the fact that Durant is also under contract for this upcoming season and 2 more beyond that, I just have a hard time imagining that any single player that changes teams will be better than Durant, and the Suns got him already. Okay, so when you're thinking about, I know it's tempting. I know during the offseason that it is tempting to go out and get, to imagine the Suns pursuing any of the names that you hear. I mean, it's part of what makes being an NBA fan fun, right? The offseason is crazy. We all love to, read through the rumors and but imagine the slop stuff coming true, which is what I like to call the crazy reports that we hear this time of year. Is Zion going to Charlotte for the number 2 pick to draft Scoot? I mean, it's already building up. I get when you hear Lillard is available or Beal is available or even Zion is available that Suns fans want to imagine, A, is there a way to get him? And then when they realize, no, there's not, to be a little bit disappointed. But what I'm here to tell you is that you don't get to keep making deals forever. You make the best one. You make the one that will have the largest impact on your team and have the greatest chance of turning your team into a champion. That's what you do this for. So I understand when you hear Lillard and then you're like, crap, maybe we could have gotten Lillard as a Suns fan. Maybe we could have gotten Lillard for less than it costs to get Durant. And maybe Lillard makes a lot of money. He's not as good of a player. Maybe there's a world where you concoct some sort of dream in your mind where it's like, well, we could have traded for Lillard and then not had to give up so much, and then maybe we get to keep Bridges or Cam Johnson or any first-round picks or something. I can't walk through that entire imagined world and tell you it's right or wrong, but I will tell you that almost every single GM in the NBA would have done the Kevin Durant trade, and I haven't talked to each and every one of them. You can take my word or leave it, but I feel pretty confident saying that. Last summer, we heard about a lot of teams, the beginning of what might end up resulting in Jaylen Brown getting traded this summer, to reference somebody that I've already mentioned on this show, may have begun when the Celtics explored a Durant trade that might have included Jaylen Brown. That should show you a team coming off of a finals appearance with a young stud forward decided, hey, it's worth looking into. And it might have affected their relationship with the guy. That should show you that the Suns got the person who will make the biggest impact of anyone that is on the market or could be or was on the market. That is just a fact. The Suns already won the NBA offseason. They just did it 4 months ahead of time. Let's close out the show with the Wizards situation. Tells us that the Suns are going to have to poke around on the margins. Them not pursuing Beal and any other assorted superstar players in the NBA this offseason tells us their version of winning the offseason will be not a superstar, but complementing that superstar, taking advantage of the teams that maybe are in flux because they are acquiring a superstar or getting rid of a superstar. And it'll be all about value. And so I have some buy low free agents and some buy low trade targets on top of the Wizards guys we just talked about to illustrate the types of things the Suns will be looking to do this offseason. I'll dig through each and every one of those for you after one more quick break. We went through Denny Avdia, Corey Kispert, Kyle Kuzma, Monte Morris, DeLon Wright, all these guys in Washington that might be gettable, might be impactful if and when the Wizards decide to trade Beal and sort of move into a rebuild for the first time really ever under their ownership. But that's just one example of the types of players the Suns might be able to pursue as teams do other business. You can call it buying low, you can call it the scrap heap, you can call it value signings. You know what I'm talking about. Who are the players that are falling through the cracks for one reason or another? Maybe they're veterans who are being looked over. Maybe they're young guys who just haven't had a chance yet. Maybe they're players whose contracts just don't fit the direction of their teams. Those are the types of players the Suns should be looking to scoop up. And I have free agents and I have trade targets that I will walk through now. Dante DiVincenzo felt like a steal from Golden State last summer and then gets to the playoffs and can't hit a three to save his life. I don't think he's necessarily due for a massive raise, but he also might change teams. Could the Suns just be the next team to scoop him up on a value deal and see if the three-point shooting, which worked in the regular season for DiVincenzo, if he can hit shots in the playoffs? Big if. If you get him on a minimum, I think it's an if worth exploring. Seth Curry. Undersized, played in a weird situation in Brooklyn last year, but obviously can shoot the lights out and obviously has played with Kevin Durant and is probably, maybe you would say a better Damian Lee. Somebody who can also do a little bit with the ball in his hands. Somebody who can be a playmaker a little bit more than a, Damian Lee type could. Now, is he a playoff player? Maybe not, but again, he's a free agent. This is not a trade. This is not somebody, who's looking for a big payday. He's 32 years old. He's been in the NBA for a decade now. Could you get him on a smaller biannual exception type of contract or even a minimum at this point in his career? I think maybe you could. Najee Marshall. You remember him from the first round in 2022 when he was with the Pelicans and was playing quite a bit. I think he's somebody who, on a great team, which the Suns have the potential to be, You know, he's 25 already. He's not as young as you would think for somebody in his third NBA season, but he has made, 35% of his threes in a past season. This past year, he took over 200 and made 30%. Can that tick up to closer to league average, 34, 35, 36% if he's getting wide open looks? And he's big enough and smart enough to be a pretty solid 3-and-D type of role player if that happens. He is 6'7", 220 pounds. Pretty ideal. These three guys are all restricted free agents or team option players, and I don't think any of them necessarily will change teams. But if they did, I would be looking into it if I'm Phoenix. Isaiah Livers from the Pistons quietly had a very strong season, very big and can make threes. I think another kind of like Marshall, but even better as a shooter. Lindy Waters, he's the guy who killed the Suns every time that they played Oklahoma City when they played the Thunder like 3-4 times in the course of a month. He's also, again, team option, but if he did somehow come loose from that Oklahoma City system, we know they turn over a lot of their young roster every year to try to find guys. They have a lot of picks every season. I could imagine him becoming available. He's also a big shooter. Kessler Edwards, you remember that name. He plays for the Kings. He is a defender that made a bunch of threes in that one Kings game, I think heading into the All-Star break when we thought the Suns maybe had a chance at the 3 seed. And then ended up not having a chance at the 3 seed, partially because of Kessler Edwards. He's a guy who's never really made his threes consistently, but again, on a great team, he would be worth a look to me. That was only his third season in the NBA, and he did make 15 of 43 triples, 35%. His rookie season in Brooklyn, he made 48 of 136 for 35%. I think that there's a 3-and-D player in there if he ever really got consistent playing time. Probably a better Josh Okogie, if I'm being honest with you. Worth looking into. The thing that inspired all of this in terms of digging back into some of these guys was John Hollinger pointing out Yuta Watanabe as a Suns option. Another former net. I feel like 4 guys on this list are former Nets. I'm going to get to one more before it's all said and done. But he is a player who, again, has never really gotten a fair shake in the NBA on a great team. And this past year made 44% of his threes. He's had previous seasons of 40% and 38% on legit volume. The 40% season was on legit volume in Toronto. And he is also big, 6'9", and 215 pounds. I don't know if he's somebody whose defense will hold up in the playoffs, but as a roll of the dice in the regular season, and then maybe he turns into something in the playoffs. If he's a minimum player or a biannual player, you could do it a hell of a lot worse. Trey Lyles, George Niang, both guys in similar situations, could easily just be retained by their teams. They were both in the playoff rotation for their teams already, but big forward shooters who, again, could play in the playoffs. Last one is Paul Reed. I just don't think he's available really, but if that we talked about with Brandon Duenas on Tuesday's show, the idea of could you potentially stretch Chris Paul, trade DeAndre Ayton, and then use your mid-level exception to go out and get a center, whereas we've typically been talking about the mid-level being for a guard. If you're in that spot, Paul Reed is a restricted free agent, but I really don't think the Sixers are going to want to go up to $12 million at that mid-level number to get a backup center, which obviously Paul Reed would be for them because Joel Embiid is their center. If the price gets high enough, I could see Philly moving on, and Paul Reed could be somebody on a Suns team who wants to invest a small amount in the center spot. He could be in a rotation with Durant and like Jock Landale, and I think you would feel decently about that. All right, that's the free agents. I brought up a lot of those names before, but some of those are new, so hopefully that jarred your memory a little bit and gets your mind moving in that direction. There's players to be had if the Suns are aggressive and go out and get guys and really do a sell job on, hey, you can succeed here if you take the contract we're able to give you. You can build up your value. You can win a championship potentially and, go back out on the market. That's what you have to be thinking about if you're the Suns. Find the next Bruce Brown in Denver, right? That's kind of the approach here. But there's also trade targets. A lot of guys who are either on expiring contracts who the team would like to maybe get off of, or players who just might not fit the trajectory of their team or for one reason or another are just question marks in their current situation. And so again, you're talking about Shamet and second round picks, Cameron Payne and second round picks, both of those guys and second round picks. It would be a smaller trade on the margins, but it would sort of be your last salary moves. A risk, but maybe in some cases a risk worth taking. Number 1 on this list is Gary Harris. He has a non-guaranteed contract for this season. I don't know. I think the Magic would prefer to trade him. I don't really know if they want to pay him. It's not a huge salary. It's like $13 million, but I could easily see them cutting him. If you could convince them, hey, don't cut him. We'll trade you something, and we can get this done. Gary Harris had a great year last year for Orlando quietly. I mean, great for what he is, right? He's not going to be, a superstar, but as a role player who has decent size to defend guards and made like 38% of his threes, really, really solid role player for a playoff team. Doug McDermott, not so much of a defender, but obviously another shooting option. He's on an expiring contract. Buddy Hield, same thing. He makes a lot of money, so you might not be able to make that fully work, or it might affect your tax bill in a way that's not worth it for Buddy Hield, but he's out there. Otto Porter Jr., I think, is a really interesting one. He's had pretty much like 2 seasons in his career where he was healthy. One of them he won a championship. One of them in Washington, he made a deep playoff run with that team and made 45% of his threes. When he's on and when he's healthy, he is a really, really good playoff type player. 6'9", can stroke it and has the defensive size to hold up again in the postseason. Jayshawn Tate, that's a name you'll probably remember from his Houston days as he was coming up. He's really more of a theoretical player. He's never had a real positive season, but he's been on bad teams most of his entire career. He kind of makes his threes, but turns the ball over a lot. Seems like he's always tried to do a little too much with the ball in his hands. He had 1 year, 21-22, where he made 31% of his threes, made 31% the prior year. Can you get that up to 34, 35 again if they're wide open? If so, he might be, again, another version of a better Josh Okogie. Last but not least, Joe Harris. I thought his career might have been over after a lot of those injuries. It was really starting to sound bad. You had guys like Zach Lowe saying last offseason, there's not a lot of trust between him and the organization over the way that his injuries were managed. But he came back last year, made his shots. He is another big shooter, another guy who I think defensively is nothing close to a stopper. You're not going to put him on the best opposing player. He's already 32, but he played 74 games last year, made 43% of his threes, and had a minus 0.6 defensive box plus minus. Take that or leave it. I think as long as you're in the 0 to -1 range, I think you can play some minutes in the playoffs. He's another expiring guy, but he has size and can make shots. It's kind of all you're looking for. I think you can hear the through line of what I'm trying to pursue and what tends to be available, right? You're not going to get a new starting point guard for the minimum. This is just not going to happen. If you move on from Chris Paul, as I talked about on Monday's show, you have to have a plan at that spot. That's not what you're finding. You're not finding, for all intents and purposes, somebody who's a full-on replacement for DeAndre Ayton. But you can find backup guards, starting caliber and backup caliber wings and forwards who can make shots, who maybe have some upside and are available. And that's what I really think the Suns, obviously you have to nail the Paul and the Ayton stuff. You have to get that right. But what I think will really make us feel especially like the Suns are a championship contender is if they nail these moves also, because they really just don't have a lot on their roster right now. They have an opportunity to kind of reset and build something from scratch around what Vogel wants to do, around what Booker and Durant are great at. And that can be a good thing. You just have to get it right. That'll wrap us up. No Beal, no superstars. But that's okay. Guys like that are going to make or break the Suns offseason. Be back tomorrow with Aaron Edwards as we are every single week to close out the week. Probably another guy in the headlines to start out Thursday. You know how the NBA offseason is. We spend 24 hours talking about a new person all the way up until July 1st when we get to see what happens. So hit follow, subscribe, get that show and more throughout the offseason in your feed, free and available every single day. In the meantime, check out Locked On NBA. They'll get you covered with everything going on around the league. The crazy rumors, the more serious rumors, and all the basketball you could want. That show's available on all podcast platforms as well. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.